Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. We also host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And this week, with Rabbi Adam Mintz and Rabbi Avraham Bronstein, we explore various ways of viewing Abraham's epic journey and how it reflects on our own. So put on your hiking shoes and prepare to leave your native land, your parents, and your home, and join us for Abraham's epic journey and our own. So everybody, welcome to Madlik. This is our weekly clubhouse where we do what we call disruptive Torah, which means that we look at the Torah through slightly new lenses from a new angle and hopefully inspire all of us to do the same and to think freshly about our ancient texts. And we do record and we post as a podcast on Sunday. And so if you enjoy what you hear, go ahead and listen to the podcast, give us a few stars, say something nice, and share it with your friends. And with that, we are literally beginning a journey because today's Parsha is Lech Lecha, which is the beginning of the epic journey of Abraham. And the words Lech Lecha are open, as is his journey, to multiple interpretations, and I'm sure we're going to get into them all. But basically, in Genesis 12:1, it says, "And the Lord said to Abraham, Go forth from your native land, Lech Lecha ma'artzecha, from your father's house, to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you and curse those that curse you, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you." And certainly we know that the Abrahamic families are far and wide. Both Islam and Christianity all account their faith and their journey to Abraham. So this is a man who began a wild adventure. So let's start by asking you in the audience and our panel, what is striking to you about the onset of this epic journey and Lech Lecha?
So I'll start by saying that what strikes me about Lech Lecha more than anything else is the fact that the background is not there. We don't know anything about what led to God saying to Abraham, leave your father's house and, go to this land. And I wonder why that is. Why, if the Torah tells you something, there's a reason for it. And if the Torah doesn't tell you something, there's a reason for it. And I wonder what the reason that the Torah doesn't tell you is here.
I think that's a great question. Michael?
Yes, it's a wonderful question. Having worked in the theater for so long, when anything happens on stage, you try to find out from the actors where they came from, so that when they walk in with a bit of history. So I got an opportunity, as I said, to study the Zohar with my friend Misha Shulman, the Rabbi, and I'll share with you some of what we found. It begins with a principle. It says nothing is aroused above before it is first aroused below, so that what is aroused above rests on it. So the indication is the work below has to be done first before anything can happen from above. There has to be an awakening. So it says here, the secret behind the words Lech Lecha is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu inspired Abraham with the spirit of wisdom. And Abraham knew how to judge the spirits and the winds of the civilized world. He observed them, weighed them in the scales, and knew how to connect them to the powers entrusted to govern the inhabited places of earth. And he measured and observed very carefully, and he realized that the whole middle point of the inhabited world is the point from which the whole world moves out to all its corners. And then he discovered continuing to observe and weigh in an effort to determine the nature of that central point of the creation. But he was unable to understand it. So he could not cleave to it, it says. He saw the strength of that place, hamakom, and realized that he could not understand it. Abraham knew and checked all the governors and rulers of the world that had dominion over the entire civilized world, and he was examining all those who govern and rule over the directions of the inhabited world, and he learned how to exercise their power over one another. But he still, when he reached the point of Malchut, he saw the force of those depths, and he couldn't understand it. And as soon as HaKadosh Baruch Hu noticed his awakening and his passion, he immediately revealed himself to Abraham and said, Lech Lecha, go, learn, perfect yourself. So those are the words of the Zohar in translation. So you want to know what he was doing before? He was learning everything there was to know about the entire creation. And at the center, the core of it, was this mystery that could only be filled by a HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
So I'm not sure whether what you're saying is an answer or it begs the question, because it seems to me that as you look through the commentaries, you've given a beautiful commentary from a mystical point of view. Right. So a mystic feels free to project onto Abraham what he imagined him going through. The story that most of us learn in Cheder, in Hebrew school, is the famous story of Abraham's father had a store where they sold idols. And he let Abraham be an idol sitter, if you will, to take care of the store while he went away. And one after the other, people came in either to buy an idol or to give an homage, some food to the idol. And similar to Michael, what you were talking about, Adam somehow, it doesn't really in this regard say where he came to these revelations, but he engages in almost a Socratic dialogue saying, well, why are you feeding this idol if it was made just yesterday? Why are you worshiping him if he has eyes and he can't see, if he has ears, if he can't hear? And again, I'm not sure that this Midrash, which most kids walk away thinking is part of the text, but it's not, begs the question or answers it, or maybe what it says, and we can discuss some other perspectives on what led Adam to this moment. Maybe what it says is that Abraham's journey is our journey, and that all of us therefore have license or maybe an obligation to project onto Abraham that journey of discovery of the hidden mystery, if you will, as you put it, of the universe.
I like that. I like the idea that Abraham's journey is our journey. The Sfat Emet, who's one of the Hasidic masters, says that God says Lech Lecha to everybody. It's just Abraham was the first person who actually heard it.
So to pick up on that, and we, if you join Madlik a few minutes before 4, we always ask Rabbi Adam what he's going to speak about in synagogue on the coming Shabbat. And he intimated that it's not altogether clear that what we just read is actually the full story, even from the text. I'm not sure who divided up the Torah into portions, who divided it up into chapters. Maybe one day we'll spend a session going on that. But if you look a few lines before the beginning of our Torah reading of Lech Lecha, it actually has either a variant or a supplemental account of what actually happened. In Genesis 11, it says, Terach took his son Abraham, his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abraham, and they set out together from Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. But when they had come as far as Haran, they settled there. So just as in Genesis 1 and 2, we have two stories of the creation of Adam and Eve, here too it seems almost as if we have two stories of leaving Haran. In chapter 11 of Genesis, it doesn't give credit to Abraham. It doesn't say that Abraham left his father, this rebel without a cause, this rouser of breaking of the lauded idols of his parents. Here it says that his father took him and his grandson and his wife, and maybe they didn't make the whole trip, but certainly from this text, it looks as though his father was involved. And I'm wondering, not only do we have a license to look at this story through our own eyes, but we have a license to say Abraham could also envision it with his own eyes. How many times do we as children envision certain things that we believe we've come up with on our own, and in the second telling maybe we realize we got that from dad, or we discovered that from mom? And I'm wondering if a little bit of that is going on here as well. What thinks you?
Clearly, we all receive a good part of our personality from parents. There's no doubt. And it may well be that the man who made idols but didn't believe them. It's possible that that was his business and he knew it was a good business. I don't know. The question that comes to my mind is, when they left, where did they think they were going? And how many times in our lives do we have a destination in mind, but something wonderful or not so wonderful happens, and our destination has to change? In Abraham's case, it seems to me they were headed towards Ur of the Chaldeans or whatever that was, or they were headed, and then God says, I'll show you where to go. So it's completely open, completely improvisatory, if you will, spontaneous. He has to just go and follow that sound, whatever direction they were going in. So that's been my experience in life, actually. I've in my life where I was intending something or nothing, and suddenly I heard a voice to go in that direction. And
so, Michael,
I've been lucky. I met wonderful people.
I just want to point out, Geoffrey, this story of the family of Abraham traveling from Ur Kasdim from Haran to Ur Kasdim, all of that, this is really the first time in the Torah, and this is already the third portion, where people travel. Each of the previous two parshas talked about genealogies, talked about different people, and it almost never says they started here, they went there. So what you see at the very least is that Terach is exploring, and I think you get credit for exploring even if you have bad intentions. The idea that you want to explore is in itself something that we that we encourage, and I think that's an important point, Totem.
Well, a little bit later in the portion, we get into some fights and interrelations between Abraham and other people. And obviously, it's only when you interact with other people that people get to name you and you get to name yourself.
If I can just jump in for a second, I'm thinking about Cain, who is nav and nod, who's constantly in motion from place to place with no direction.
Correct. And that was God. That was the punishment.
That's right.
He had to travel.
And here,
this is the first time we have travel where he chooses to travel.
That's right.
So, but let me go a little bit later on. Abraham starts to be defined and to define himself, and he gets involved in some battles with other kings, and his brother gets kidnapped. And in Genesis 14, it says, "And a fugitive brought the news to Abraham the Hebrew, who was dwelling at the Serabinths." And if this is the first time, to my knowledge, that Abraham is actually called a Hebrew, La'Avram ha'Ivri. And Rashi quite rightly says, the one who came from the other side of the river, Me'ever Hanahar. And so in one verse, not only is Abraham defined as this traveler, as this person who's defined by not where he is, but where he is coming from. But it is kind of interesting that a fugitive is the one who is giving him a message. We almost are in a world that is populated in a different way than a other account. And it's not simply one heroic person, but we're surrounded by a world in flux. And it gives, I think, more even emphasis to this whole concept of Lech Lecha in terms of a journey. I do believe that we're all kind of on the same page here in terms of this process. There is this trite saying where life is a journey and not a destination. And whether it is literally Abraham beginning on this journey, or whether it is the fact that maybe he didn't quite start it all by himself, but his father started it, but didn't finish it, and that kind of echoes this concept of we never finish our journey, and our journey is only the beginning of a bigger journey. It's just so emblematic of what Abraham created and what this story values, I think. So what makes us of God here? Because I think so many of the interpretations revolve around the birth of monotheism. Michael, you were talking from a Kabbalistic point of view that it was clear that what instigated this departure was some eureka moment or some lifelong struggle for identifying the mysteries of the universe. But if you look at the text itself, I don't think there would have been a person in that ancient world who would have done anything unless he was inspired by the Spirit. The fact that God said to him, make this journey, God spoke to in the Epic of Gilgamesh too. The gods were speaking all the time. There's nothing inherent in this tale that leads one to believe that Abraham created some revolution in theology. And I'm just wondering if that is something that resonates at all with you, or is it clear that this man began his trip because of some theological inspiration?
I don't think anything is clear, and I don't even know what a theological revelation means. What you just said was right. We talk about Abraham as being the first Jew. The truth of the matter is that the scholars all say that's not technically correct. Jews are related to Judah. It only came later. Abraham is the first monotheist.
Well, he's the first Hebrew. He's the first Ivri.
Right, Ivri. He's separate from everybody else. He recognizes God. There's a very famous Rashi. Rashi says that when they were traveling, it says that Abraham converted, is the word. Avraham megayeret ha'anashim, v'Sarah megayeret et hanashim. And Sarah was converting the women. Converting doesn't mean converting like we have today. It means that they actually were teaching monotheism. They believed that monotheism was something that needed to be taught, that needed to be spread to all different people. And I think that's really interesting.
I could make the argument that Abraham was the first atheist. And what I mean to say is, if you look at Abraham from the perspective of Terach, or if you follow the story of Nimrod, who puts him into a fiery furnace, here is a guy who's saying that everything the world believed was a god does not exist. He says, no, the sun has no power. The stars have no power. This totem, this animal, it has no power. And what he was claiming was, in fact, of a power, and of course this is all a projection of the Midrash or of Maimonides or of the Zohar, was this hidden, this unseen, untouchable thing. From the perspective of the landed powers that be, he was denying God. He was denying all that they believed in. And from that perspective, is there not, and it leads all the way to Spinoza, who was excommunicated by saying God is nowhere but God is everywhere. Maybe he was the first secularist.
You remind me of Peter Brown, actually. I think you can hear me now.
Yes.
Right. Great. So Peter Brown, the great historian of the Roman Empire, in one of his books about religion in the ancient Roman Empire, or the classical world, talks about how the Judeans, right, the original Jews, were seen as atheists by the more polytheist pre-Christian Roman Empire at the time, because they couldn't comprehend how Jews maintained a belief not in their God, but in a God. It didn't make any sense to them.
Fantastic. Yochanan, welcome to the Bima.
Thanks so much for having me. By the way, Rabbi Maza, the chief rabbi of Moscow, 400 years ago, he says what you just said. So he says that Abraham was a culture bakalim. He was like you said, he was the first secularist or atheist to deny all the deities, all the religions of the environment.
I think that's fantastic. We forget sometimes, because Judaism is 3,000 years old, that there was a time where it was the rebel in the room, and it was offering ideas that seemed to break all of the accepted beliefs. So we're moving along. I want to talk a little bit about Lech Lecha, the words itself. And I think if you had to translate it simply, you would say Lech means to go, and Lecha means to yourself. And in Rashi, his interpretation is for your benefit, Lahanotcha, Letovatcha, for your good. But as any good researcher will do, one will look to see where else these two words come together. And I know of one other place where they come together. I don't have the confidence to say it's the only other place where they come together, but it is certainly a very prominent place. And it is in Genesis 22. And similar to that, God comes forward and says, Abraham, and he says, here I am. And he says, take your son, your favorite one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. He says, Ulech lecha el eretz ha-Moriah. And so, iconically, in Pirkei Avot, it says that Abraham had been given 10 tests in his life. And the commentaries say the first and the last test both began with Lech Lecha. And so the two are certainly connected, but it makes one wonder if Rashi's interpretation is correct, because certainly it's a hard sell to say that as you're asked to take your son, your only son, that this is for your benefit. Another parallel, and then I'll open it up to discussion, is that notice the cadence in both of these renderings. In both, God steps it up. God says in our Parsha, he says to go from your land, from your father, from your homeland. And on the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, he does the same thing. And of course, the commentaries say, well, it's a test, so it's to give him more benefit, to give him more credit for the different steps that he's taken. But what makes all of you about this connection between the Lech Lecha of leaving a land, a temporal place, and this Lech Lecha of this amazing, challenging, tragic test towards the end of his life?
Well, let me ask you, Geoffrey, the question is, which was more challenging, right? Was it harder for him to leave everything that he had grown up with? Or was it harder, not knowing what God stood for? Or maybe at the end of his life, he learned to trust God already. And even though God said, sacrifice your son, maybe he had enough trust in God to believe that, I don't know how it's going to work out okay, but somehow it's going to work out okay.
One of the commentators says that it relates to this testing, that in Lech Lecha we come literally to our essence, to find out, to discover who we are. And one can make the argument that one only knows who one is when one is tempered with the test and the experience of life. Another commentary, and I kind of love this, and this maybe resonates a little bit with what Michael was saying about the esoteric texts of the Kabbalah, Emek Davar says that it is Lecha, a secret. So Lech Lecha, this is something that was hidden only to the recipient. This is a private journey. And so he says when it comes to the binding of Isaac, he says to Abraham, keep it quiet, because if anyone else knows this crazy mission that you're on, they are going to resist. So Lech Lecha, it's a hidden message, but I do believe that the fact that this iconic term was used in both instances is certainly fascinating. Uri, welcome to the Bima.
Thank you so much. Fascinating conversation. Thanks for having me. I wonder, what you made me think about is the following. Let's say Rashi's right, and that the first Lech Lecha in our Parsha is a self-journey, a self-discovery. So then if we apply Rashi to the Akedah, then we would ask, what is the self-discovery that Avraham learns then? And so we shift a little. We might shift the kind of emphasis that I think we often have of these, these are monumental, what kind of strength he must have had, what kind of courage, right? But Rashi is revealing that these kinds of journeys are not just they express perhaps our faith and our courage and our strength, but their purpose is to find ourselves, and not to demonstrate the faith or the strength or the courage, but to find ourselves. So what did Avraham find in himself at the Akedah? That's an open question, but that's sort of taking Rashi seriously, that when we have the Lech Lecha, it means a self-discovery journey in some way.
Thank you.
That's very interesting, Uri. Thank you so much. Avraham, what do you have to say about that?
I think maybe a different takeoff on what Geoffrey was saying, quoting the Ha'amek Davar, is that you want to spiritualize it just a little bit. When he says go for yourself, alone, privately, in secret, it really emphasizes Abraham's loneliness or his solitude in these things, right? And the two kind of parallel each other that way, because the first Lech Lecha is God asking Abraham to walk away from his past. And the second Lech Lecha is God asking Abraham essentially to walk away from his future. Right? That's his lineage, and that's his son, and that's where he sees future generations coming from. And it's just him. So there's something about that also. Maybe that also ties in with what Uri said, where God is asking Abraham to sort of see himself devoid of any context, right? Don't think about you in terms of where you came from. Don't think of you in terms of what you're building for future generations to carry on. Right? Just focus on you. Like, who are you? What are you all about in this moment? And that's how the two kind of bookend each other.
I think that's fascinating. Another thing that struck me is all of the patriarchs and thereby matriarchs in Genesis literally do travel. They do traverse. They are Ivrim in that sense. And the only exclusion, I believe, is Isaac, who is only in the Holy Land. Even to get a mate, he sends the servant to find him. And so his Lech Lecha was not spatial, not geographical, but clearly it was one of very, very intense a trial within one space. And what it leaves me with, and this is kind of my takeaway from this whole Lech Lecha and why it resonates with all of us so much, is the sense of pilgrimage within our religion is so strong. 3 times a year there was an Ola Regel. Regel means foot. It was a foot pilgrimage up to Jerusalem. And I think a lot of that has been lost. But if you look at this story and all the stories that we're going to learn. We've been down to Egypt already today with Abraham and Sarai. It's all about this movement, about this journey. And I think that at all the levels that we've kind of to discuss today is so part and parcel of Abraham's gift to us all.
I think that's great. I think the idea of, we really started that way. The idea that everybody's on a journey, everybody needs to find themselves. I go back again to the Sfat Emet. God says Lech Lecha to everybody. It's our job to hear it. That's the challenge. And with that, I think that's a good lesson. We should all listen to that Lech Lecha that comes to us in so many different ways, like Michael said, and enjoy the Parsha. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, Geoffrey. Shabbat Shalom to everybody, and we look forward to studying Vayera with you next week. Be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom to you all, and totally enjoy this, and let's continue the journey next week, 4 o'clock at Madlik. Shabbat Shalom.